Cameron Walsh had dreamed of this moment for 2 years, sitting in the most expensive restaurant in the city, where CEOs like Amanda would frequent. He had moved here with his daughter, taken a job at the nearest construction site, with just one fragile hope: to meet again the woman he hadn't been brave enough to fight for 10 years ago. Now she stood right before him, more beautiful than he remembered, but her eyes filled with terror. Her desperate whisper made him forget 10 years of regret. "Pretend you are my husband." The woman he had abandoned due to family pressure now needed his help, but threatening footsteps were approaching, and Amanda still didn't know this meeting wasn't coincidental at all. Cameron had 30 seconds to prove what he couldn't do 10 years before. This time, he wouldn't let anyone separate them again. The amber glow of Meridian's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across tables where million-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes and champagne toasts. Cameron Walsh sat alone at table 12, his weathered fingers wrapped around a wine glass that represented 3 weeks of careful budgeting. The irony wasn't lost on him that he occupied space among the city's elite, while his work clothes still carried the faint scent of machine oil and orange-scented hand soap, no matter how thoroughly he scrubbed before these weekly pilgrimages. His best navy Oxford bore the invisible signatures of his trade: calloused hands that built things meant to last, fingernails that never quite shed their construction site patina, despite religious attention with a worn nail brush. The leather portfolio beside his plate contained hand-drawn sketches that had become his trademark on job sites, structural diagrams rendered in precise pencil strokes that revealed the builder's mind beneath the blue-collar exterior. For 8 months, every Friday evening had brought him to this same ritual of hope, disguised as casual dining. The waitstaff knew him now as the quiet construction supervisor who ordered modestly but tipped fairly, never causing trouble despite clearly being out of his financial element. His methodical approach to finding Amanda had consumed 2 years of planning that rivaled any construction project he'd ever managed. After his wife Sarah's death, when the fog of grief had finally lifted enough to allow for future possibilities, Cameron had made a decision that felt both desperate and inevitable. He'd sold most of Sarah's jewelry to fund his relocation to this city where Amanda Brooks had built her empire, keeping only her wedding ring on a chain beneath his shirt. The construction industry had provided the perfect cover. Henderson Construction needed an experienced supervisor for their downtown renovation projects, and Cameron's reputation for bringing complex jobs in on time and under budget had made the hiring process surprisingly smooth. What his new employer didn't know was that their latest supervisor had chosen this particular company specifically because their current project site offered a clear view of the Morrison Tower, where Amanda Brooks maintained her corner office 30 floors above the street. Cameron had studied Amanda's public life with the systematic thoroughness he brought to reading blueprints. Business magazine profiles revealed her Friday evening dining patterns. Social media posts provided glimpses of her professional schedule, and society column mentions painted a picture of a successful woman who seemed to have everything except genuine happiness. The hostess approached with her practiced smile, the same polite inquiry she'd made for months about his dining arrangements. Cameron checked his watch. 7:25. His mental database of Amanda's patterns suggested arrival between 7:30 and 8, a window that had become the most important 30 minutes of his week. "Actually, I am expecting someone," he said, the response he'd refined over 32 previous Fridays. His voice carried just enough confidence to deflect further questions. At 7:31, Meridian's front door opened with its soft chime, and Cameron felt his carefully controlled pulse spike as Amanda Brooks entered. She commanded attention without apparent effort, her charcoal-grey dress speaking of boardrooms and power, while her elegant updo suggested the kind of professional discipline that had built her company from nothing. But tonight something was different, a brittleness in her posture that Cameron's construction-trained eye recognized as structural stress approaching critical failure. His months of observation had familiarized him with Amanda's usual dining patterns. She typically arrived animated and engaged, her conversations flowing with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in her professional domain. Tonight, however, she moved with the careful control of someone fighting to maintain composure. As Amanda spoke with the hostess, Cameron's attention was drawn to movement near the restaurant's back corner. A silver-haired man in an expensive suit rose from his table with the deliberate, predatory grace that Cameron recognized from dealing with difficult subcontractors. Men who used money and intimidation to get their way, regardless of contracts or ethics. The approaching confrontation triggered every protective instinct Cameron had developed during 20 years of construction work. His hand moved instinctively to the portfolio beside his plate, fingers brushing the pencil sketches that had become his tools for understanding complex problems by breaking them down into manageable components. Without conscious thought, Cameron stood and moved toward Amanda with the purposeful stride of a supervisor approaching a crisis situation. Years of managing construction crews had taught him that sometimes the most effective intervention was simply showing up when someone needed backup. Amanda turned at his approach, and their eyes met for the first time in 10 years. The recognition hit like a lightning strike, illuminating the decade between them with painful clarity. Her lips parted in shock, his name forming silently as her quick mind struggled to process the impossibility of his presence. The silver-haired man reached them as Cameron arrived at Amanda's side, creating a triangle of tension that seemed to vibrate with unspoken threats and half-remembered promises. "Darling," Cameron said, his voice carrying the steady confidence he'd learned from managing difficult negotiations with property developers and city inspectors. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder." The lie emerged with the smooth precision of someone accustomed to thinking quickly under pressure. Amanda stared at him for a heartbeat that felt eternal, her business-trained mind rapidly calculating the implications of his unexpected appearance. With the lightning-fast decision-making that had made her a successful CEO, she stepped closer and slipped her hand into his, her fingers trembling slightly against his calloused palm. "It's okay," she managed, her voice barely steady. "I just got here myself." The silver-haired man's predatory confidence wavered as he found himself facing not an isolated target, but a united front. His cold assessment of the new dynamic reminded Cameron of subcontractors who specialized in intimidation, effective against individuals, but less comfortable when confronted by organized resistance. "I don't believe we've been introduced," the man said, extending a manicured hand that contrasted sharply with Cameron's work-roughened grip. "Charles Whitman. And you are?" "Cameron Walsh," he replied, applying just enough pressure to communicate that handshakes were serious business where he came from. "Amanda's husband." Charles's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise, his predatory confidence showing its first real cracks. Husband, Charles repeated, his gaze flickering to Amanda's bare ring finger. How unexpected. I was under the impression that Amanda was unattached. We prefer to keep our personal life private, Amanda said, her boardroom composure reasserting itself. You know how it is in business, Charles. People make assumptions that can complicate professional relationships. Cameron could feel the tension radiating from Amanda's body like heat from an overloaded electrical system. His construction experience had taught him to recognize when structures were approaching failure points, and everything about this situation suggested Amanda was operating dangerously close to her limits. Charles studied Cameron with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating new prey, taking in the quality of his clothes, the calluses on his hands, the slight scent of honest work that no amount of expensive cologne could completely mask. Business discussions, Mr. Walsh, I've been attempting to convince Amanda to consider a very generous buyout offer for her company. A life-changing amount of money, really. Cameron's mind automatically began analyzing the statement like a blueprint, looking for load-bearing elements and potential failure points. She mentioned it. Cameron lied smoothly. She also mentioned that she wasn't interested. Ah, but circumstances change, don't they? Charles's smile grew sharper. Market conditions, personal situations, unexpected expenses. I find that what seems impossible one day becomes inevitable the next. The threat was barely concealed, and Cameron felt familiar anger building in his chest. The same protective fury that had driven him to confront unsafe working conditions and unethical contractors throughout his career. Some things are worth more than money, Cameron said quietly. Amanda's company is one of them. Charles studied him for a long moment, clearly trying to determine whether this construction worker represented a genuine threat. You know, Mr. Walsh, I don't think we've established exactly what line of work you're in. Amanda's always been attracted to ambitious men. The condescension was designed to diminish Cameron's worth while highlighting the obvious disparity in their social positions. But instead of rising to the bait, Cameron smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who measured success differently. Construction, he said simply. I build things that last. How practical, Charles replied dismissively. Well, I suppose every marriage requires its compromises. Amanda, I do hope you'll reconsider my offer. The business world can be so unpredictable, especially for small companies without proper protection. The parting threat delivered, Charles returned to his table, where a younger man in an equally expensive suit waited with documents that seemed ominous in their implications. Cameron and Amanda stood in silence for a moment, processing the confrontation, while other diners gradually returned their attention to their own conversations. We should sit, Amanda said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. People are watching. Cameron guided her to his table, pulling out her chair with the same careful courtesy he'd shown her in college when they were young and poor and desperately in love. Across the table from her for the first time in 10 years, Cameron found himself cataloguing the ways time had changed her. The ambitious college student was still visible, but she was overlaid now with the confidence and wariness of someone who had built something significant while learning that success often came with unexpected costs. Cameron, Amanda began, her voice catching slightly on his name. I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you just stepped in when someone was threatening you. Cameron finished. It seemed like the right thing to do. Amanda laughed, but the sound carried no humor, only relief mixed with something that might have been hysteria carefully held in check. The right thing to do, she'd repeated. You always did have this way of making complicated situations seem simple. Some things are simple, Cameron said. Someone threatens you, you protect them. Someone needs help, you help them. And someone you love walks away? Amanda asked softly, the question carrying 10 years of unresolved pain. Cameron was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain a decade of choices that had led him to this table. Someone you love walks away, he said finally. And you spend the next 10 years trying to figure out how to find them again. The admission hung between them like a bridge across years of separation. Amanda's eyes filled with tears that she controlled with practiced discipline. Is that what this is? She asked. You finding me again? This isn't your kind of place, Cam. Amanda continued, using the nickname that no one had spoken in years. You hate pretentious restaurants and overpriced wine. She was right, of course. Amanda had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to see through his carefully constructed facades. Maybe I've changed, he said, though even he could hear how unconvincing it sounded. Have you? Amanda leaned forward slightly. Because you just rescued a woman you haven't seen in 10 years without asking a single question about what you were getting into. That seems pretty familiar to me. Cameron couldn't help but smile at her assessment. Some things don't change, I guess. No, Amanda agreed, her own smile carrying both warmth and sadness. They don't. The waiter appeared with professional discretion. Cameron ordered wine, something mid-range that wouldn't destroy his budget but would demonstrate effort, and Amanda requested the same. When they were alone again, Amanda reached across the table and placed her hand over his, where it rested beside his water glass. Her fingers were warm and familiar against his work-roughened skin. Why are you really here, Cameron? She asked. And please don't tell me it's coincidence, because we both know you're terrible at lying about things that matter. Cameron looked down at their joined hands and made a decision that felt like stepping off everything safe and predictable. Because I never stopped loving you, he said simply. Because I've spent 10 years wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to fight for us instead of walking away when your family made it clear I wasn't good enough for their daughter. Amanda's breath caught, and he felt her fingers tighten on his. Because my wife died 2 years ago, he continued. And while I grieved for her, I realized that some part of me had been grieving for you for much longer. The words came easier now that he'd started. Because I have a daughter who deserves to see her father happy. And I haven't been truly happy since the day I walked out of your apartment and left my heart behind. Tears gathered in Amanda's eyes, threatening to spill despite her practiced control. You think you weren't good enough for me? She whispered. Cameron, you were the only man I've ever met who was too good for me. Do you have any idea what it did to me when you left? Do you know how many nights I lay awake wondering if you ever really loved me at all? The pain in her voice hit Cameron like a physical blow, shattering his carefully constructed narrative about protecting her. I thought I was protecting you, he said. Your father made it clear that being with me would destroy your future. Your mother said I was being selfish. The life I deserved? Amanda repeated bitterly. Do you want to know what that life looked like? It looked like business school because I needed to prove I could succeed without help. It looked like building a company from nothing because I was determined to show the world that I didn't need to marry money to be worth something. She pulled her hand away from his, and Cameron immediately missed the warmth. It looked like marrying a man I didn't love because he was everything you weren't. Wealthy, connected, approved of by my family. It looked like 3 years of trying to convince myself that security was better than love. You were married? The words came out rougher than Cameron intended. For 3 years, Amanda confirmed, to a very nice man who deserved better than a wife who called out another man's name in her sleep. The admission created a silence heavy with possibility and regret. Cameron closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the waste of it all. He divorced me very quietly, very amicably. She continued. He said he hoped I would find my way back to whoever Cameron was, because he was tired of competing with a ghost. Cameron opened his eyes to find Amanda watching him with an expression that mixed sorrow with hope. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry for all of it. I thought I was doing the right thing. We were young," Amanda said simply. "We were young and scared, and we let other people make our choices for us. But we're not young anymore, are we?" "No," Cameron agreed. "We're not." The wine arrived, providing a momentary respite. Amanda took a sip and closed her eyes, savoring it. "Tell me about your daughter," Amanda said when she opened her eyes again. Cameron's entire demeanor shifted, his face lighting up with unmistakable paternal pride. He pulled out his phone to show her a picture of Lucy, 8 years old with gap-toothed grin and mischievous eyes. "Lucy," he said, his voice warming. "She's 8, and she's brilliant and stubborn, and she makes me want to be a better man every single day." Amanda studied the photo, seeing echoes of Cameron in the child's features. "She's beautiful," Amanda said sincerely. "She looks like she could be trouble." "She is," Cameron agreed with obvious affection. "Last week she convinced her teacher to let the class have a pizza party by presenting a detailed PowerPoint presentation on the nutritional benefits of tomato sauce and dairy products. She made charts, Amanda. She's 8 years old, and she made charts." "A girl after my own heart," Amanda said, smiling genuinely. "What happened to her mother?" Cameron's expression sobered, but there was no bitterness in it, just sadness. "Car accident," he said simply. "Sarah was coming home from a late shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, and a drunk driver ran a red light. Lucy was only 6. She still asks when Mommy is coming home sometimes." "I'm sorry," Amanda said, meaning it completely. "Sarah was a good woman," Cameron said. "She deserved better than a husband who married her partly because she reminded him of someone else." The brutal honesty took Amanda's breath away. "Did you love her?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Cameron said without hesitation. "Just not the way I loved you." She knew it too, though she never said anything. Sarah was kinder than I deserved. They sat in contemplative silence, processing the weight of their shared history and separate losses. "What about Charles Whitman?" Cameron asked finally. "What kind of trouble are you in with him?" Amanda's expression darkened immediately. "The worst kind," she said grimly. "Charles is my ex-husband, and our divorce was complicated." Cameron felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That was your ex-husband?" "Unfortunately, yes." Amanda's voice carried bitterness. "Charles and I were married for 3 years, and when I finally worked up the courage to leave him, He made sure the divorce was as painful and public as possible. What does he want now? My company, Amanda said flatly. During our marriage, Charles convinced me to put some of my company shares in joint accounts for tax purposes. When we divorced, the settlement was supposed to split those shares 50-50, but Charles has been using legal technicalities and delays to avoid transferring his portion back to me. Cameron felt anger building as he began to understand the scope of Charles's manipulation. Can he do that legally? He's been doing it for 2 years, Amanda said. My lawyers say we'll eventually win, but Charles has deeper pockets and more patience for legal warfare than I do. Meanwhile, he's been using his shares to interfere with my business decisions. That's why he wants to buy you out. Exactly. He gets to play the generous ex-husband offering to solve my financial problems, while conveniently forgetting that he created those problems in the first place. Cameron studied Amanda's face, seeing the exhaustion that came from fighting a battle on multiple fronts. There has to be something we can do, he said. We? Amanda raised an eyebrow. Cameron, this isn't your fight. You're right, he admitted. I don't understand legal technicalities or business strategies, but I understand Charles Whitman. What do you mean? I mean, I've met men like him before, Cameron said. Bullies who use their money and connections to get what they want, who think that having expensive lawyers makes them untouchable. Cameron's mind was already working through the problem like a complex construction project. But here's the thing about bullies, he continued. They're only strong when they feel safe. What Charles doesn't expect is for you to have someone who's willing to get dirty. Amanda stared at him, beginning to understand what he was suggesting. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that Charles made a mistake tonight, Cameron said. He assumed you were alone and vulnerable. He didn't expect you to have a husband who might start asking inconvenient questions. A slow smile spread across Amanda's face as she began to see the possibilities. You want to keep pretending to be my husband? I want to give Charles Whitman something to worry about besides legal technicalities, Cameron said. Someone who might start digging into his business practices. That could be dangerous, Amanda warned. Charles doesn't like to be challenged. Let him try. Cameron said simply. I've been handling bullies my entire adult life. Amanda laughed, despite the seriousness of their situation. You're serious about this? Dead serious, Cameron confirmed. Charles hurt you, and he's still hurting you. That makes it personal for me. Amanda reached across the table and took his hand again, her grip firm and grateful. Why would you do this for me? We haven't seen each other in 10 years, Cameron. You have a daughter to think about. Cameron was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain something that felt both complex and utterly simple. Because you're the woman I never stopped loving, he said finally. Because some things are worth fighting for, and some people are worth protecting, and you're both. Amanda felt tears threaten again, overwhelmed by his unwavering support. And because, Cameron continued, I have a daughter who's watching how I handle the important moments in my life. I want her to see that when someone you care about is in trouble, you step up. You don't walk away because it's complicated or dangerous. What if this costs us any chance of... Amanda stopped herself. Any chance of what? Of us, she said quietly. What if getting involved in my mess destroys any possibility of figuring out what we could be to each other now? Cameron smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. Amanda, I spent 2 years moving my entire life to a different city just for the chance to have a conversation with you. Do you really think I'm going to let Charles Whitman scare me away?" Amanda squeezed his hand, feeling safer than she had in years. "In that case," she said, "I think we need to plan our strategy very carefully. Because if we're going to take on Charles, we need to be smarter than he is." "I'm listening." Amanda's expression shifted into the focused intensity that had made her a successful CEO. "First, we need to understand exactly what Charles has been doing and how he's been doing it. I have financial records, legal documents, correspondence with his lawyers. If there's a pattern of manipulation, we need to document it." Cameron nodded, impressed by her systematic approach. "Second, we need to present a united front that makes him nervous. If he thinks I have a husband who's willing to fight for me, he might make mistakes." "And third," Amanda's smile turned sharp. "Third, we find out what Charles is really afraid of, because everyone has something they don't want exposed." They spent the next hour developing their strategy, with Amanda explaining her legal situation while Cameron asked practical questions that revealed gaps in Charles's approach. By the time they finished their meal, they had the foundation of a campaign that felt both sophisticated and achievable. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Amanda hesitated. "Cameron, there's something else you should know before we go any further." "What?" "The reason I divorced Charles wasn't just because I didn't love him. It was because I discovered that he was responsible for my father's death." Cameron felt the blood drain from his face. "What do you mean?" "My father died in a car accident 3 years ago," Amanda said steadily. "At the time, it seemed like a terrible coincidence. He was driving home from a business meeting, lost control on a wet road, crashed into a tree." She paused, gathering strength. "But I found evidence that Charles had been embezzling money from my father's company for months before the accident. My father had discovered the theft and was planning to confront Charles the next day. Instead, my father ended up dead, and Charles inherited everything through me." Cameron stared at her, shocked by the implications. "You think Charles killed your father?" "I think Charles arranged for my father's car to have an accident," Amanda said carefully. "I can't prove it, but the timing was too convenient." "Amanda, if that's true, then we're not just talking about a messy divorce settlement. We're talking about murder." "I know," she said quietly, "which is why I need to be very careful. Charles is dangerous, Cameron, more dangerous than I let on earlier." Cameron absorbed this information, feeling the weight of what Amanda was asking him to help her with. "Does that change your mind about helping me?" she asked. Cameron was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications for himself and for Lucy. Then he looked at Amanda and saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago, the woman he'd never stopped loving, the woman who needed him now more than she'd ever needed anyone. "No," he said simply. "It doesn't change anything, except that now I understand why this is so important." Amanda felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of fear and loneliness that had been tightening for 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," Cameron said. "Thank me when Charles Whitman is in prison where he belongs." As they walked toward the restaurant's exit, Cameron caught sight of Charles still seated at his table, watching their departure with cold calculation. The two men's eyes met across the dining room, and Cameron felt a chill of recognition, not of Charles personally, but of the type of man he represented: dangerous, entitled, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. But Charles Whitman had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that Amanda was still alone, still vulnerable, still the frightened woman he'd manipulated into marriage 3 years ago. He hadn't counted on Cameron Walsh, construction supervisor and single father, a man who'd learned that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with money or lawyers, but with stubbornness, courage, and the unshakable determination to protect the people you love. Outside the restaurant, Amanda and Cameron stood together in the cool evening air, processing the magnitude of what they'd committed to. "What happens now?" Amanda asked. "Now we go home. We think about what we've learned, and tomorrow we start building a case against your ex-husband." Cameron said, "But tonight we remember that we found each other again after 10 years apart, and that has to count for something." Amanda stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "It counts for everything," she said softly. Cameron reached up and touched her face, his work-roughened fingers gentle against her skin. "We're going to figure this out, Amanda. All of it. Charles, your company, what this means for us. But we're going to figure it out together." Amanda leaned into his touch, feeling safer than she had in 3 years. "Together," she agreed. As they stood together under the restaurant's elegant awning, 10 years of separation and pain began to transform into the foundation for something stronger. A partnership built not just on love, but on shared purpose and mutual protection. The road ahead would be dangerous and uncertain, but for the first time since her father's death, Amanda Brooks felt ready to fight back. And Cameron Walsh, the man who'd never stopped loving her, would be fighting right beside her, armed with the patient determination of someone who built things meant to last, and the protective instincts of a father who understood that some battles were worth any risk.